Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Michelle James, and today is the last webinar in the Perform Workshop webinar series. So before we get into the webinar, I had a couple of questions last week in part 2, and I thought they were really good questions just to address for everybody. So the first question was, when you're rating posture, so this is in relation to using the Perform worksheet to assess a manual task. When you're rating posture, do you assess the worker's actual posture or what posture they should be using if the task is performed correctly? So in answer to that question, I would say that whenever you're doing the Perform risk assessment, you want to get an accurate reflection of what the worker is actually exposed to. You're not going to get an idea of that if you just go by what they should be doing or the safe work method. You really need to assess what the worker is actually doing, whether it's the posture or the force. You really want to get that accurate assessment. The second question was around when you're doing the Perform assessments and you notice other issues like, and this probably came from our videos that we ran last week, but when you notice other issues like the need for eye protection or even hearing protection, or there could be exposure to biological hazards, slip, trips and falls, all those other kinds of issues, do you need to include that in the Perform risk assessment? So the answer to that is the Perform risk assessment is focused only on the physical risk factors for a hazardous manual task. It does not incorporate those other things. However, there is no harm in putting them down, and if you do notice them, you certainly need to address them. You can put them on the information section of the worksheet around that task, but you do need to know that Perform isn't designed to pick up on those things, but certainly no harm recording them if you identify them. Okay, so we will be looking at developing controls today and some information around implementing the Perform program. We plan to run the session for about 45-50 minutes today, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end of the session. If we do run out of time, I'm happy for you to post your questions and I will try to get back to you over the next few days. So over the last two parts, so the last two webinars, we've discussed why it's made good business sense to manage manual tasks. And we've also highlighted that there's a lot of tools, ergonomic tools out there, and Perform is just one of a number of ways that you can approach managing your problem manual tasks. But what sets Perform apart is that it is a really simplified approach, and it has been successful because of this in a diverse range of workplaces. Last week in particular, we focused on developing an understanding of the risk factors and how to complete the Perform risk assessment part. Back in week 1, we introduced you to this model that's on your screen there, and these are the critical elements that Perform requires to be implemented successfully. So we talked a lot about the items on the left, about having the workers involved, management, commitment, and the site champion. We're going to be focusing a bit more on the middle part of that fat blue arrow today. So today's session is really about developing the controls and implementing the Perform program. The last half, we are really going to wrap up this Perform series by giving you some really specific guidance on implementing the Perform program in your workplace. Now, I have had a few questions on getting access to the resources. So at the end, just for a couple of minutes, and I did this in session 1, but I was just going to quickly recap and show you again on our website where you can go to find our Perform resources if anybody has missed that. Please do complete the survey at the end of the webinar today as well. It's such valuable feedback for us to improve these sessions for you. So, as I said last week, we talked about the risk factors and assessing your problem manual tasks using the worksheet. So the next step is to develop controls. So once you've identified what problem manual tasks you have, how do you go about prioritising which tasks to target first? Where are you going to allocate that first share of the resources? So that's a pretty important decision, especially when you're starting off with the program. So there's just some tips there on the screen for you to consider. You might want to make a high priority to improve tasks where you have had injuries associated with them. And you might need to look at your injury records to find a bit more out about that. Looking at the seriousness of the consequences around the injuries. If they are quite a high profile amongst the workers, if there's a lot of complaints or a lot of feedback about those particular tasks. When you're looking at the perform worksheet, if they are coming up very high in those risk factors, particularly if they're coming up very high in force or repetition and duration. And also if you've got a link to some productivity problems around those tasks, it might make good sense then to prioritise those tasks. If those tasks are being done by a lot of workers, or if they're being done a lot of the time, then you're going to have a lot of people exposed. So you do want to address those as well. Now here is a really important tip. When you're first implementing your controls and identifying which task to start off with, we really recommend that you focus on controlling the less complex manual tasks first. Implement some easy solutions initially, and that way you can get a few runs on the board early on. So prioritising your tasks is something that should be discussed within the work team. The supervisors can discuss that with the health and safety officer, and management should also be involved. The other important role of management is in overseeing the action plan to work through those tasks and help to plan the implementation of controls. Again, controls that are cheap, quick and easy to implement, as well as addressing those high priority tasks, should be done first. That's really going to get the benefit of getting the ball rolling. People are going to see this program is actually making a change in our workplace, and they're going to start feeling quite confident in the program. So now you've identified which tasks you're going to address, you need to decide what actions need to be taken to control the risks that you've identified. So it's at this point that we find a lot of people aren't sure where to start. There may not be any solution in sight. So developing controls for your problem manual tasks is just like solving any other problem. It's a journey, okay? So you may not know what the destination is going to look like, but it's still a process that you'll go through and you'll get there eventually. You know you have a problem, you've identified a problem manual task. Once you've identified the risk factors using perform, you've already taken the first step towards solving the problem. So you may not know what the solution is at this stage, and that's okay. When it comes to developing controls, you just need to follow some common problem-solving approaches. So the first step is identifying the problem. So you've done that with using the perform worksheet. The next step is to explore what information is out there and try and create some ideas around the solutions from that. And we'll focus on that in the next few slides. The next step is selecting the best of those ideas and then building or testing that idea. And finally, evaluating the results of that. So the perform approach to risk management of hazardous manual tasks is in line with the legislation. It follows the hierarchy of control, and this can also give you a really good starting point or a strategy to follow. Let's have a look at the perform worksheet. So if you have a look at worksheet 2, down there under the matrix, you can see it's got risk controls. And I just want to highlight there, it says design control options. So it's really guiding you through the hierarchy of control. So that's great. Now I know there's a wide range of listeners today, and some people may not be familiar with the hierarchy of control. So I'll just quickly provide a brief overview of that now. Basically, the hierarchy of control is about starting off with the most effective way to manage the risk. The workplace health and safety legislation requires that the person conducting a business or undertaking to work through the hierarchy of control when they're managing risks. So this means that the person conducting the business, or could be the employer, must always aim to eliminate the hazard, and that's the most effective control. If elimination is not reasonably practicable, then they can minimise the risk as far as is reasonably practicable by doing things like substituting, isolating, or introducing engineering controls. You can see that administrative controls are level 3, they're right at the bottom. So your admin controls should really only be used when there's no other practical control measure available, so they're really your last resort. They can be used as an interim measure until a more effective way of controlling the risk can be implemented. And they're also actually quite useful as a supporting type of control to support higher level control measures. For example, if you brought in a new mechanical lifting aid, so that would be a level 2 control, then you could use an admin control like training your workers in how to use that lifting aid to support that higher level control. So people do often ask about the cost when it comes to implementing controls and what the expectations are around that. So if the cost, yes, the cost of controlling a risk can be taken into account, and it's part of determining what is reasonably practicable, but it can't be used as a reason for doing nothing. And the key thought there is whether the cost is grossly disproportionate to the risk. So yes, it can be considered, but it's certainly not an excuse for doing nothing. We also often hear people ask us, well, how much can people lift, or what is a safe way to lift? And we say, well, the question really should be, why are you lifting at all? So can the lift be eliminated by changing the workflow or the system of work, or bringing in engineering controls such as mechanical lifting aids? So you can see that's just illustrating that it's always important to start at the top at level 1 and then work your way down. So this concept, the hierarchy of control, should also be part of training that workers are given so that they can develop controls in line with the hierarchy. So how do you actually develop control ideas? So this stage of your problem solving for manual tasks is all about exploring what's out there, using creative thought processes, engaging with your workers, and activities that are going to generate some possible control ideas along the way. Let's just have a look at each of these tips that are up on your screen. So the first one is linking the control to the risk factor. Now, when a manual task risk factor has been identified, so you've done your perform worksheet, you have identified some risk factors, it's important to go to the next step, which is identifying what is actually causing the risk factor. So the cause of the risk factor is what we call the source of the risk. So you can see on your screen there's 4 key sources of risk. And in order to eliminate or minimize the risks, the controls should be aimed at these 4 areas. So you've got your design or layout of your work areas, the nature or size. So it's really about the characteristics of what's being handled and how it's being handled. You've got the system of work and the work environment. So these areas have a lot of ideas and information under them, and the code of practice, the Hazardous Manual Task Code of Practice, has a lot of information that you can go and read about these areas. You'll probably die of boredom if I go through all of that with you now. So what I'm going to do is just give you a really quick overview of each of those now. But the key point is, if these are the things that are going to be causing those manual task risk factors. So if you can fix these things, then you're going to take away the problems that are affecting the body. So let's have a look at the work area design, or the layout of the work area. So this is where the job is based. It's where the work's being done. So it could be the workbench, it could be the seating It could be the workstation, could even be the back of the ute where the storage area is, or even in the cab of the vehicle. So if you've got a good area layout, it's going to reduce exertion, reach distance, twisting and bending, things like that. You can see a couple of pictures there. We've got at the top, it's a very cluttered storage area. So obviously it's going to be quite awkward for someone to get in there and access to remove that stuff. They can't really get in there to fill up the trolley because of the layout. Underneath that, we've got a really nice, orderly work area layout. And we can see the aisles are wide enough so you can push a trolley through there. So good work area layout does have suitable, adequate space. Think about having good working heights that are suitable for the task. Maybe have them adjustable to suit all different workers. Having frequently used items within easy reach. The next source of risks that we can consider is all about the object that's being handled. So how heavy it is and how big it is and how many times it's being handled. So if you can reduce the size of a load or reduce the weight, make it smaller, that can help reduce the exertion. Conversely, if you make things a lot larger, for example, order things in bulk quantities, then they might need to be managed by mechanical means. So that's another way, just by considering changing the size of the load. So you can also think about possibly changing the way the load is handled by implementing mechanical aids. So that's something that comes under this heading. And there's such a wide range of different mechanical aids out there. You can also think about tool design. So the tool handle can impact on the risk factors. It can cause awkward postures. It can cause increased grip if it's an awkward kind of design. Maintenance is an issue. For example, if you have knives that are blunt, then obviously you do need a lot more force to cut through. So maintaining tools as well. So giving consideration to the nature, size, weight is another important source of risk. So the system of work is the third area, and that's just all about how the work has been organised. How long the shifts go for. It's how many workers are rostered on, and are there enough workers to cope with the work schedule. So you want to try and plan in tasks. So having good work organisation will help provide postural variety, give workers flexibility around their tasks and times. It's going to help minimise the time pressures they're under and the stress. It'll allow for a consultative process. It'll help you minimise peaks in your workload because you'll have enough staff on for peak periods. Or maybe you can rearrange the material flow through the workplace. Setting up maintenance schedules can also be part of the system of work. And thinking about training workers, that's another part of the system of work. Let's have a look at the last area, which is work environment. So your work environment, that can be a source of risk for sprain and strain injury, so it can cause risk factors in so many ways. You can think about the vibration, the impact that can have on the worker. That can come through, be exacerbated by poor surfaces if workers are driving on those. If workers are pushing trolleys on uneven floor surfaces, or there are lips or ramps, that's going to increase the force or the sudden force required to get a trolley moving. It can make it very difficult to use trolleys and mechanical aids. Lighting can impact on posture if workers can sometimes crane their necks to try and get away from glare, or they can get in closer if the lighting's quite poor. Cold environments and windy environments can all increase the grip force and the exertion required. And again, heat and humidity and things like that can also, if workers have slippery hands, those things can also start to cause some risk factors. So we've just had a really quick overview of those 4 sources of risk. Now I just want you to have a look at the 4 manual tasks that are pictured on the screen. And we've already identified the risk factor in the task for you. But I want you to think about what is causing that risk factor. So for example, number one, we can see the worker is leaning over a linen tub, and we can see that's quite an awkward posture that she's in. So what is the source of risk? So what is causing her awkward posture? So it's the design or the layout of the work area. So it's because of the way she's got the tub set up in front of the machine and she has to reach over. Okay, so it's the way she's got her work area laid out. So I'd just like you to have a look at the other three tasks and think about the risk factor that's there for you. What is causing that risk factor? So for two, what is causing that forceful exertion? So we have a worker that's pushing a wheelchair up a ramp. So we would say, well, it's the nature of the load. So it's actually the weight of the person and the wheelchair itself, and the way that it's been manually handled. And it's also another source of risk there. It's about the work environment. It's the slope of that wheelchair ramp. The next one, we have a worker who is sorting tomatoes on a conveyor belt. So what the big risk factor there is repetition. So what's the source of risk for that? So we would say it's a system of work. Okay, you've got the speed of the conveyor belt. The worker doesn't have a lot of control of that, but the size and the speed of it is bringing through so many tomatoes so quickly, that's causing the worker to have to move very quickly. And the last one, we've got a worker lifting and pushing a wheelbarrow. So the main risk factor there is your forceful exertion. And what's causing that? Well, it's the work environment, because they're pushing it around on an uneven ground surface. So just initiating to get that wheelbarrow going, especially if there are rocks or rubble around. And it's also the nature of the load. So it's the weight of whatever's in that wheelbarrow. It could be wet, gravel, okay? So it's going to be the nature of the load as well. So that's just giving you an idea. If you can start focusing your controls on trying to reduce those sources of risk, then that's a great starting point, and that's going to stop the risk factor from impacting on the body. Okay, so now the next tip is about consulting with workers and others. So this is pretty important, given that Perform is all about participative ergonomics. Consulting with workers also brings benefits like you gaining their commitment or getting their buy-in into the program, and you're also being able to tap into their expert job knowledge. So the way of consulting with workers, you could do it through brainstorming. You know, really look for all possible control options to reduce the risk for the task that you're assessing. You need to make a rule with the work team that you can go outside the square and any idea is okay. Okay, don't dismiss ideas at the brainstorming stage. Can I really encourage you not to be afraid of the brainstorming process? It can really be a great way to get the creative juices flowing. Generally, most workers are realistic, and they are the ones that we've seen time and time again at workplaces. They're the ones that come up with very simple and cost-effective controls. Starting off with a real pie-in-the-sky kind of idea, while it may not be realistic, it might be the inspiration for a simpler but very effective control. And just remember, coming up with the controls is like a journey, okay? It's a process. Now, one organisation that used Perform really had a lot of success with it, commented that getting their workers to think outside the box was actually one of their biggest challenges. Workers really did hold back. So that might be something you might need to think about, depending on your workplace and the people and the nature of the people there. This might be something that could take a bit of effort. It's also useful to discuss with the workers alternative ways of doing the job that there could be. And other parts of consulting with the workers and looking for different ways, you could also run surveys and ask for feedback that way. The other people you can talk to help identify different ways could be your engineers, manufacturers and designers, consultants, and they could be ones to help get some ideas going. You could look at similar tasks in your organisation and see how they're being done. They might have a solution or a control, Now, if it is being controlled, it might not be a perfect fit for your task, but it could spark the idea for the solution, and you might just need to make some modifications to suit the specific context of your manual task. You can also have a look around and find out what other workplaces or what other organisations are doing. Talking to your work teams, they may have colleagues in other organisations, supervisors, work colleagues, or even getting in touch with industry associations that do similar work. Talking to suppliers is actually a really helpful way, again, to find out how to control a particular issue. They might be able to suggest something. They may be able to come up with a modification or a new product. Suppliers or manufacturers may already have addressed this particular problem for another one of their customers, so they might just be able to quickly refer you on to the solution. Now, I've just got an example where an organisation was able to get the supplier to provide the solution for them. So it was an organisation in Brisbane that imported parts from China, and they came in these shipping containers, and the workers needed to manually unload the boxes. They were about 12 kilos each. So it took the workers the best part of their shift each day. And you can see that there would have been some exertion, definitely awkward postures, particularly when they're reaching up the top and at ground level, and also a lot of repetition and duration. So they've identified those risk factors in their Perform worksheet. So then when they've gone to controls, they've been actually able to eliminate this. They already did have forklifts, but they were able to approach the supplier and ask if the supplier could palletize this product. So when the product arrives, it can be unloaded with a forklift, which is eliminating that manual task for this organisation. Now, this is one of the case studies we have on our website, and it also has some cost-benefit information in there. So this control was no cost to the organisation. The supplier did it for them, and they've actually gained over $20,000 a year savings in just relation to the productivity savings. And just getting back to developing controls, we really recommend that you trial your controls before you implement them. So if you can build a mock-up in a certain area of the workplace, or if you can hire the equipment you're thinking about using before you commit to purchasing it. You never really know how it's going to go in real life, in the workplace, given all the other variables. So it's always a good idea to trial it first. So we're just going to cover some general guidance now about once you've developed your control ideas, how do you then move on to implementing them into your workplace? So it's important to think about preparing an action plan, and we do have a template for that in the Facilitator's Manual for Perform. It's available on our website, and I'll show you where at the end of the session. So you can develop an action plan. You can think about short, medium and long-term controls. So you might have a really great control, but it might be 18 months or so off, depending on the budget, but you do need to do something about that problem task. So you could implement some short-term controls in the interim. Of course, if you're getting in, going to develop, when you bring in the controls, you need to develop or update your safe work procedures and retrain and supervise your staff in those procedures. And of course, it's important, even though you may have trialled the control, to keep monitoring it once it's in place, just to make sure that it is working effectively. This step is also part of the risk management legislation. So it's important to make sure that that control isn't reducing the risk factors. So you could reevaluate it using the Perform worksheet. You also want to make sure that it isn't introducing other risk factors. So it may not just be physical risk factors for manual tasks. It could be introducing noise or some other issues. So you want to make sure you evaluate it to make sure it's not introducing another hazard. It's also important for the Perform program to be sustained. So you don't want to just have a short-lived program, you want an ongoing program. So it's important for the Perform process to make sure that the controls that have been implemented are working effectively. So to do this, you need to make sure that your work teams that have been involved in assessing and implementing them are still able to get together on a regular basis. So they need to be able to have that ongoing communication where they can go through this monitoring stage. So if you're the coordinator or the champion for the Perform program or the trainer, you're going to be the vital person that is driving that ongoing commitment to Perform. We have a controls decision matrix. So if you look in the resource manual on Appendix 8, the resource manual in Appendix 8, there's a template there that you can use. So you might find the work teams will come up with a lot of ideas on controls. So this could be a useful template that you can document those and then progress those ideas to management for the approval process. Another really useful resource that can help in putting forward a business case around controls to management, particularly if you are looking at a control that there might be some initial cost associated with, is the injury cost calculator, which is on our website. And that has some example costs of potential injuries. So that information can be helpful when you're looking at, a $3,000 or $4,000 overhead crane or a $20,000 or $30,000 injury. So that can help inform management of the costs that could be saved. Now we're just going to have a look at training, because I have mentioned that part of the Perform program is to provide training to the workers. Once you've implemented controls, you also need to provide training to the workers. So we are talking about very specific training. We're talking about training on the manual task risk management process. So how to use the Perform worksheets, what the risk factors are, the control hierarchy, and how to develop controls in line with that. You will also need to think about how you're going to train the workers in the new work procedure once the control's implemented, and how workers can also then go on to report any future problems or maintenance issues around those controls. Okay, so the last part of our webinar is about preparing your organisation for using or implementing the Perform program. So you can see we've broken it down into 4 stages up there on the screen for you. So stage 1 is really all about planning. This is where you want to make sure that you do have that management commitment to the program and commitment to providing the resources for allowing workers to go offline, have the training, be involved in Perform activities, and commitment to the resources to provide approved controls. This is where you might find some of the resources on our website helpful. I mentioned the injury cost calculator. We've also got those Perform case studies which highlight some cost benefits real organisations have experienced as a result of addressing a particular task and implementing a control. Stage 1 is also where you'd identify the key people that would be involved. Who's going to be the Perform coordinator? Do you have multiple sites, so you might need more than one coordinator? Or who are the trainers going to be? And who are the other people that need to be involved? Are they, what designers or engineers or contractors? You'd also want to think about which business areas you want to target. Now, we recommend that when you're starting to implement Perform, that you don't try and roll it out across your whole organisation all at once. Just start off small. So you might want to consider running a pilot. So identify a suitable area of the business to run that pilot. So it might be an area that has quite a few hazardous manual tasks, or an area that has some significant sprain and strain claims. You also want to try and pick an area where the people are interested in participating in the program. The planning stage also includes developing your communication strategy. So how are you going to communicate about the program with the workers, between management, what system's going to be in place then. And also your implementation plan about, your action plan, who's going to do what when, what's the decision-making process going to be around the controls, who's going to review them, and your evaluation strategy. So it's really important for the sustainability of the program to keep evaluating the Perform program. So you need to think about how you're going to evaluate it, and I will talk a little bit more about some ideas there shortly. Stage 2 is really critical because this is the aim of this stage is all about consulting and engaging with the workforce. So this will really be the fulfillment of that, starting that communication strategy. So it's letting them know all about the program, how it works, and the reasons why it's being implemented. It might be where you start looking at delivering your training sessions as well. So stage 3 is where you'll start doing the pilot. Okay, so this is where you're going to start doing your perform activities. The workers will be doing their assessments and coming up with some controls, and hopefully you'll be able to get some of those implemented. So this is where you might be able to identify that you have had some manual tasks controlled. Maybe you can identify even some productivity savings or decreased injuries. So it's really good to be able to record that and report on that. You should have some learnings as well that you can also use. Stage 4 is when you're thinking about rolling it out to the other parts of the business. So, your learnings from stage 3 is going to help inform what you do in stage 4. And again, at stage 4, you'd be doing more planning and going back to what you did in stage 1 to roll it out. We just always like to make a comment about management leadership because it's one of the really critical parts of the where the perform will be successful or not. And in fact, a lot of research has found that management support and leadership are really strong influencing factors in affecting health and safety outcomes in a workplace. At Workplace Health and Safety Queensland, we found that good management leadership and support is critical for the success of Perform. So up on the screen, we've got some thoughts on how management can actively support the Perform program. They can do this by being involved in the Perform activities, going to work sites, maybe getting involved in Perform training sessions at times, looking at some of the problem tasks or looking at some of the controls that have been implemented. If the drive for the program is coming from the top, if management's seeing this as a really important thing, it is going to be so much more effective. So when you're conducting your Perform activities, so you're starting to implement the Perform program, we've mentioned you might want to consider a pilot. So do start off small and try and pick a group of people or a work area that is receptive and open to the idea of trialling this program. With your work teams, you might want to identify about 8 to 10 people is probably a good size. Identify those people to participate in the training. Think about how you're going to identify them. Some organisations ask for people to nominate themselves. That's great. They're getting people who are really keen then. But you also might want to identify people for a variety of reasons, maybe people who actually are involved in performing some high-risk manual tasks that you're aware of. It might be a team that is experiencing quite a high number of sprain or strain injuries. And of course, if they're really willing or keen to participate in the program, then that's a good reason to include them. You need to think about how you're going to deliver that team training. And it's great if you can include the supervisors and managers as part of those teams, and then they can be involved in that training as well. The work teams training is an essential part of the Perform program. And in that team training, you can develop it based on the resources that are on our website, but feel free to tailor it to your organisational needs. The key things that you need to include in that training are information about risk management, so the hierarchy of control, the risk factors, so the perform risk factors, how to use the perform risk assessment worksheet, and how to come up with control ideas. Just a couple of questions there for you to think about when you're developing the training for your workplace. You know, there are so many different sized employers, different types of organisations, and they've all implemented perform in different ways, and it's really interesting from my point of view to see we have our ideal model of the way we expect perform to be delivered, but at the end of the day, organisations take that model and they tailor it to suit the needs of their organisation and what's going to be the best fit for them, and it works so well when it's done that way. So really think about what the perform training might look like at your workplace. You know, what would fit? Would you do a single session with some follow-up assessments? Would you train everybody? Would you just train, you know, a couple of small teams? Will you put in place a committee to help roll it out? You could also do it in toolbox sessions, so break the training up into, say, 3 or 4 shorter sessions, kind of like we've done with these webinars. Think about how you can make the training engaging for your workers. Okay, so the last really important area for us to think about is evaluating the program. So they say that what is measured is managed. So for the program to be more than a flash in the pan, if you really want to see some ongoing benefits and a sustained program, it's so important to measure what's happening and to then be able to report that to management. So you need to think about how you're going to do this. How does your organisation currently measure? Does it rely on lagging indicators or more proactive measures? Your lagging indicators don't often reflect the cause of injury, and they don't often reflect the level of the risk. And you can also have a lot of underreporting of incidents for a variety of reasons. So we do really recommend that you focus on positive performance indicators to assess the success of implementing perform. So this might be things like assessing the number of work teams that have been set up, or the number of people that have had perform training, maybe the number of perform risk assessments or tasks that have been assessed, or the number of controls that have been implemented. Some of those indicators could also be incorporated into KPIs for management and for sites, and that way it's really going to help drive people to try and achieve them as goals. Over time, organisations do certainly use their lagging indicators, so they look at their claims data to show the success of the program, and we've had organisations report significant reductions in their sprain and strain claims. For example, the Council City Gold Coast reporting a 60% reduction in their claims around manual handling related injuries about 12 to 18 months after implementing the perform program for the particular branch that implemented it. So your lagging indicators can be useful over a period of time. So that's pretty much the content we needed to cover for the perform workshop. From here, it's really up to you to decide if you want your workplace to use the perform program. There's definitely gains to be achieved with the perform program, not just around manual tasks, but it can provide overall improvements to culture and communication across the organisation. And there are some first steps that you might want to consider to get the ball rolling. Now, I did say I wanted to quickly go through where the resources are on our website. So there's just a lot of the resources that we have. We have the PowerPoints. They're templates, so you can download those off the website. They're on the top left there, and tailor them to your needs. We also have, for management, it's not just for management, but it can be useful just to give them a brief overview of the Perform program. So it's just frequently asked questions on Perform. And we have the Perform worksheets there available on our website. The two key documents, especially if you're implementing the program, are the Perform Resource Manual for Workplace Trainers, and that's really designed for people who are implementing the program. And then we have the Perform Handbook, which is on the right. So both of those are available on our website, and you can see where our website address is up there on the slide as well. So I'm just going to go to and show you where they are on our website. So if you go to worksafe.qld, this is pretty much the page that you should come to. Then you want to click on Injury Prevention and Safety. And if you look below that, then that brings up a number of options. So click on Hazardous Manual Tasks. And when you click on that, you should get Hazardous Manual Tasks there with some more options. And if you look below that, then you'll see Participative Ergonomics and Manual Tasks. So that's the Perform page. And when you go to the Perform page, there's a number of resources there. And if you just look at the Perform resources, that will bring up all the resources that I've talked about. We're just going to zoom out so I can show you the other side of the screen. On the right-hand side is the No Sprains, Big Gains link. So that's the film that is one of the good Perform resources. It can be used as a training tool in your workplace, so you can download that, and that's a great way of showing workers how to use the tool. And it also helps explain the risk factors as well, if you wanted to incorporate that into your Perform training. So we do have a little bit of time for a couple of questions, and I'll just give you a minute if you wanted to post any, and then I'll get back to you. Okay, so we have just a couple of questions, just addressing questions around whether this will be put on the website. Yes, it will. All 3 webinars in the Perform Workshop series will be put on the website in the near future. There's a bit of a process they need to go through, but they'll certainly be put up on the website, and you can use that as an ongoing resource. I do have a question from someone in the construction industry who's asking about, I guess, the culture within the industry, and, you know, how the culture of the industry is a bit of a barrier to addressing hazardous manual tasks. In answer to that, that's a pretty common barrier that a lot of workplaces do bring up as an issue. It's not an easy one to address, and I see a number of ways to start going about it, but it's certainly not something that's going to happen quickly. One of the things you can do, and I see if you're the person in your organisation who is going to try to implement the Perform program, your role could be to try to persuade management to see the benefits around implementing a program like Perform or addressing their hazardous manual tasks. And we have, you know, a lot of resources to help you with that. Videos that demonstrate the benefits of leadership on our website. They have a lot of benefits for organisations, not just as far as meeting compliance, but a lot of cost benefits as well. We have the cost benefits information as well that you can use. So I think also highlighting that we have projects where we are, as a Workplace Health and Safety Queensland, trying to raise awareness of the importance of safety leadership, which is going to start influencing the culture. And projects like that will only help over the long term, but it is a problem out there, we recognise that. And I've just got a question about when the webinars are on the website. I think we should be able to email everybody a link who's been a participant in the webinars once they're up on the website. So that should be fine. You can always check back on the website. It would be promoted there, but we will certainly try to email everybody a link so that you know that they're up and running. Please do fill in the survey at the end of the webinar. It's really great for improving the session. And thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you.